Hello, welcome to a spur of the moment video. So I was messing around this morning and believe it or not, I haven't had a proper chance to play around with any form of GPT. So I thought, well, what I'll do, I just download the most recent version of Edge, make sure that's up to date. I'll log into Bing with my account and just request access, thinking it might take couple of days. I requested access and it just gave me access straight away. So basically that's it. As long as you have some sort of Microsoft account, be it a live account or like I did, I've got like a legacy Hotmail account or an Outlook account or anything that allows you to log into Microsoft. I have a secondary account which I'm using here, which I used to use for messing around, and I use that one. And you just come in, click on chat up here, and you're straight into chat to play around with GPT. So I thought what I'd do is, I've been interested in this scenario. As many of you know, at some point in my life I worked as a lecturer. I was a sessional lecturer, and about, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago I was watching some podcast, and I'm trying to think the name of the guy on there. It was Max somebody, and he was talking about what would be the tipping point for him with artificial intelligence, in terms of when he thought, it'd be really useful for him. And he is also teaches, although at much higher level than I ever taught. And what he said was that it was a point at which he could tell the AI to write him a course. Now, we're not quite there yet, but I thought it'd be really interesting to try this out a little bit, to get the GPT interface, whatever you want to call this, in Bing to help me write learning materials, not necessarily for a course, but just for my own use. It's almost like, okay, what can I learn today? So that's what I'm going to do. I've just got Notepad off to one side here, and so we're going to go down a learning rabbit hole. Off to one side here. It's annoying me now that I can't think the name. I can't think of his name. I can't even think of names of people who it wasn't in AI either. Sometimes I have this name problem where I just annoyingly forget people's names, famous people's names. Anyway, I'm just looking that up off to one side here. What I will do is, I was going to ask it about deep learning, and what I was going to ask it is, what should I learn about deep learning today? In fact, I thought this would be an interesting thing for me to do every day, is ask it a question like this, is what should I learn today, or what should I learn about today? Here I'm just going to pick a subject. Okay. Interesting. So it's giving me a list of deep learning projects, or applications in the broadest possible sense here. Not not necessarily applications as it pertains to computing or programming, but in terms of how you apply something. So lung cancer detection, Detectron. What's that? Detectron is a Facebook AI research software system that implements state-of-the-art object detection algorithms. This actually wasn't quite what I was after, but I'm going to copy this to Notepad. The other useful thing with this, if you use the copy, so you'll notice here, just for those that aren't familiar with the way this is handled in Bing, you'll see here, and this varies, I've noticed. I did a bit of kicking the tires this morning. You'll notice that if you hover over certain areas of the text, you get the links, and then if you click on them, it'll open up a second tab. But what's cool is if you copy the text like this, you get all the sources down the bottom. So you're good to go. So this would be really useful if you were using it to help you, amass learning materials. So what I really need to do is maybe rephrase that. Some key topics in deep learning. Let me try that. It's funny, when I was kicking the tire, I actually asked it to write me some Python code for a perceptron, which it did. And then it asked me, and then I asked it to, I asked it to explain the code, which it had already sort of done. And then I asked it to show me how to use the code, because it basically wrote a function. And then it proceeded to give me an example of how to use that perceptron. I think the first time I did it, it was just an illustrative model using data that it had actually generated itself to show. It must have been it was like 2 clusters of data, and it showed like the dividing line between the two. And then the second time round, it was using, I think, the classic ORCID database. So it did give 2 different examples. And there were a couple of mistakes in it. Mainly what I noticed that happened is it, in the first one, it generated something which it then never used, but it wasn't a problem because it generated it again in the second example where it was showing me the application, and it just had a different variable name. That was all. So yeah, the code ran fine. So that was interesting to see that. Some of the key topics in deep learning include CNNs, RNNs, GANs, deep reinforcement learning, and it's all right. I've got my iPad off to the side. What should I learn about today in machine learning? Okay, that's why. I wasn't that specific. So let me see. Oh, yeah, this is much better to do it this way, I think. There we go. Because you get, as I've shown you, you get all the... it's a bit cleaner than use. I mean, you can highlight this, I noticed, and do it, but it's better to use this up here. Or you can do a thumbs up as well. Cool. Yeah, so the question, I realised I actually asked it earlier just as a test, was what should I learn about? Sorry about the typing. Today in machine learning. I am the world's worst typist, even though I've been working in IT and document preparation for decades. So yeah, that's always interesting. What should I learn about today in machine learning? See what happens if I feed it back in again. Because what I got, which was interesting, and I know you don't always get the same result, is I got a really cool list where it had supervised learning, unsupervised learning, reinforcement learning, and deep learning, which I thought was perfect. So what I should be able to do I don't want either of those. So I'm just learning the interface here, so I'm probably being super slow, and so I need to move that. The microphone's in the way a little bit. That's better. Probably I've gone a bit quieter. Yeah, so please in the comment section, if you've had a chance to play with GPT either through the OpenAI interface or through here, or I know there's a library in Python. So that's interesting. So you can see what it's done here. It's actually tweaked this. It's doing a bit of prompt engineering on me, obviously. So I asked it to the same question twice. One time it did this, what is the latest in machine learning? And then the other time it's doing this. So it's interesting to see how in this interface it reframes the question. Does this sort of prompt engineering on the fly. But it's all good stuff. So the one thing about this is I would recommend whenever you're using ChatGPT or anything like this, always have a notepad open to the side. I know with most of these you can go back and see what you asked, but in fact I need to follow my own advice there, and off to the side on my iPad I should copy that to the software that I use on my iPad for this. So if I just put that into notes, and I can email that to myself at a later date, because I'm not going to sit here and waste time, keep asking the same question over and over again. So, but I am going to assume that it did tell me about this. I am going to just... So, let's ask it the first question. What is supervised learning? Let's put a question in there. So I'm going to ask it, what is supervised learning, what is unsupervised learning, what is reinforcement learning, and what is deep learning? Okay, supervised learning is a type of machine learning where the model is trained on a labeled data set. The labeled data set consists of input data and the corresponding output data. This model learns to predict the output data based on the input data. Okay, For example, if you want to train a model to recognise image, this is a classic example. Recognise images of cats and dogs, you would provide the model with a labelled dataset, images of cats and dogs. The input data would be the images and the output data would be the labels cat or dog. The model would learn to predict the correct label based on the input image. It's funny because it's almost like it's reading my mind. This morning I was playing around. So one thing I do quite a bit still, even though I don't teach anymore or train anymore formally, outside of what I might do on YouTube, I often practice normally when no one's around in the house, delivering lectures. And so I had got in my head how to explain generative pre-training transformers. And so this morning I was going through and doing that, and I was imagining being asked, by imaginary students about, well, what's a good example of that? Or I was just given an example, I think. And I pretty much said exactly this thing here, because I was talking about like the supervised learning part when I was describing the difference, I think, between generative and discriminative, and the sort of things it's used for, and what happens when you get these two different types of learning. So that's that. Did I do? Yeah. I'm not following my own advice here. It's funny how used you get to just copying and pasting from Windows. Let me just bring that a bit closer again. So we're going to ask the question then. What is unsupervised? It's interesting because as well here you can see, if you think, one way of I think I've tried and frame the whole GPT thing, particularly the pre-training aspect, is it's a bit like autocorrect or sort of auto prompt, whatever you want to call it, auto prompt, I suppose, or auto suggest on steroids. And what's fascinating here is you're getting sort of auto suggest within auto suggest. So unsupervised learning is a type of machine learning where the model is trained on an unlabeled data set. The model learns to identify patterns and relationships in the data without any prior knowledge of the output. For example, if you want to group similar customers together based on their purchasing behaviour, you will provide the model with an unlabeled data set of customer purchase history. The model would learn to identify patterns and relationships in the data and group similar customers together. So I've done both of these to some degree. I'm sure I've mentioned it in other episodes on different things. When I did a Microsoft Data Science course, I remember there was a, what was it now they were manufacturing? Whether it was some sort of sports company. They're either making sports equipment or bikes or something like that, mountain bikes. And we did exactly that. We took a purchasing history data set and trained it to do or to predict certain things to do with groups of buyers and stuff like that. So things like, I suppose upselling would be used. It would be used for that. I'm trying to remember what we did for the supervised learning. It's probably things like the ORCID dataset, actually. Is a bit of a classic. And I seem to remember doing another dataset we covered was is it the MIST one? The one with all the numbers in it. The written numbers, like optical character recognition one. Okay, so You know what I'm going to ask it next is, I should have prepared all of these, but I just literally jumped on after lunch. I was so excited, I don't know if that's the right word, but inspired. There we go. Oh, there we go. There we go. I'm getting used to it now, see. Make sure I have captured all of this. I got that one, didn't get that one. The other thing with this is I strongly suggest remembering to click this if you decide to change topics. It's easy to forget. When I was kicking the tires this morning, like mid-session, I started asking it questions about cards in Magic the Gathering. And you could see it sort of taking a bit longer. And it was funny because this bit here is relatively quick as we ask it questions and it types it out. When I suddenly started throwing Magic the Gathering questions at it, it was a lot slower initially. Like it was being a bit hesitant. It was just funny to see that. And actually I probably could have, yeah, here you can see it. It also, you know, is prompting you. So there's this sort of post-answer prompt engineering as well going on, which again, I'm always fascinated by this sort of stuff. What is deep? It should. Is it gonna? Yeah, there we go. Grab that. It's always a force of habit for me grabbing everything. Over the years I've had so many things where stuff has crashed or not behaved as expected, and lose a lot of work. So what's it say about deep learning? Deep learning is a type of machine learning that uses artificial neural networks to model and solve complex problems. Deep learning models are capable of learning from large amounts of data and can be used for tasks such as image recognition, speech recognition, and natural language processing. For example, if you want to train a model to recognize handwritten digits, you would provide the model with a labeled dataset of handwritten digits. The model would learn to recognize the digits by identifying patterns and relationships in the data. See, it's reading my mind. Whoops. Yes, if you scroll down there, that was me fiddling around on the mouse. I went into the regular search engine. I did notice over here as well, just as an extra feature, we also have this compose function. So we can compare and contrast this. Let's get it to write a long paragraph. So I'm just trying to find my T. Anybody that does podcasting will know it's pretty fatal to have lunch and then start recording. Yeah, all sorts of problems. So what we want to do let's see what happens, whether this tool's any different. Let's say write about, what do I want to write about it? Okay, let me just put in supervised learning and see what happens before I get super clever. So you just generate a draft. So this, if you didn't spot, this was off to the side. I do believe, but I'm not going to poke around on my machine because I don't know what else is up on my machine in the background. I think you can also do it through the search bar, but I haven't tried that yet. Crikey, it's going. Has it finished yet? No. Okay. What have we got here? Stoppy, copy. Let me open up a new instance of Notepad and I'll show you what it actually said. Let's make sure I've got word wrap on. There we go. So we go. Supervised learning is a subcategory of machine learning and artificial intelligence that uses label data sets to train algorithms. So it's on a, because it's obviously been trained on a certain data set, and you do, if you ask it the same question, it's looking, I suppose, at what you've put in before. Also, you're not always going to get exactly the same answer. And I need to read around this a bit more to really understand like the interaction between the prompt and, say, what is going on in the background here in terms of, the pre-trained part of the model, the fine-tuned part of the model, and how the two come together, and how much of this is breaking outside of the model, if you like, that it's been trained on, or the trained model, and then doing its own additional, I suppose, tweaking and fine-tuning on the fly. So this is interesting because this goes down and see if I can make that a bit clearer. Where's the see if it's gonna, yep, there we go. It's a little bit better, maybe. Input data is fed into, yeah, blah blah blah. Okay. Instant lecture on machine learning. So this is where it gets interesting, because I'm assuming so I'm just thinking about something here. Because obviously I'm doing this manually now, but you could automate this somehow. So it keeps asking questions based on what's up here. And you can have two AIs having a conversation with themselves. And I know that's been done already, like two chatbots chatting. But yeah, it does open up some interesting things. So it's talking a lot about training models. And I know this is a bit of a long shot, but if we do, how do I train a model in machine learning? I know this is a massive area and it's not the sort of question you should really ask, but let's just see what it says. Oh, that's cool. So it gives you the general steps. Right. And a nice link to an article, and I'm assuming if I copy this into my original thing, yeah, let me just drag this across so you can see here. Whoops, that's better. So there we are. Okay. Who needs teachers, eh? Right. So no, it's you know, it's always nice. It's one thing to sit here and stick all this in and get answers out. But I think it does help to have some knowledge to be able to assess the provenance and to know how to follow a lot of this up. And I suppose that's the only thing that really, one of several concerns I've probably got about this sort of stuff is you still shouldn't refrain from fact checking or so. One of the most interesting courses I did was when I was putting together training materials for a project I was involved with, which was training East Surrey Library Service in. It was a sort of branch of computer studies. Basically, they wanted everybody to be trained in use of the major applications at the time, and we're talking here about something that I did, 15 odd years ago probably now. And I wrote a lot of modules for the applications training, and a lot to do with what we were calling at the time to be, it was internet law, but it was mainly about copyright and a few other things, Data Protection Act. This was from a UK perspective. And what was interesting is the library themselves wrote a couple of the other units on what they called, I think they were called reader discovery. So that's basically how someone who goes to the library discovers new materials. And there was a module in that on evaluating provenance, which is pretty interesting. So it really worked well alongside. I wrote, I think, a module on like advanced search techniques. So it was all about Google Power searches, and it's funny when I think about all the search engines that are around at that time. Like Ask Jeeves and Yahoo and all the other ones. I should maybe dig out. It'd be funny to dig out the notes again. They're on my machine somewhere, and see what I was talking about and see what's now left in the search engine space. Back then there was no Bing. I don't think there was. No, there wouldn't have been. But there was Google. In fact, if I go back far enough, just before that, probably a couple of years before that, so probably sometime in the early 2000s. It's funny when I say that because that's like 23 years ago. Wow. Yeah, whenever it was, I remember another thing I was teaching on, which was a management information system course on a like a postgraduate, it was an undergraduate and postgraduate business qualification. And someone came in and said, "Oh, have you had a chance to use Google yet?" Whenever that was, Actually, let's find out when did I... This is a good example of not following my advice where I said, you know, just break out of here. Let's just do when did Google launch I'll see if I get it to do this. No, it didn't. Okay. 1998. Okay. So that's interesting. So I'm trying to think when I started as a sessional lecturer. I know I started in working for myself in 98 or thereafter, because just before that I was working in programming, in accounts programming. So yeah, so that wasn't long after I started lecturing actually, because the self-employment gig initially wasn't working out too well financially, so I took 2 additional jobs. I got a sessional job at East Surrey College, and then I got some work with a consultant who did bespoke training, and he wanted someone to do the IT training for him. That worked out really well actually. And then over the years my work from being self-employed built up, so eventually I could, you know, didn't have to carry on with those. But yeah, that would be around about the time. So probably the first year I was lecturing, the person asked me about it. I was like, oh, I should check that out. Because at that point the course I was doing wasn't specifically on search engines. We were doing a bit of web development, but just because it was about information management, and I was trying to show people stuff around search engine and optimization. And because people were asking lots of questions about, you know, how information gets hoovered up on the web, and you know what's going on in the background. So I decided to do a sort of one-off lesson just on about the back end of websites, which back then would have been probably just HTML and not much CSS or things like that, or you know, all the modern server technologies. Anyway, I digress. So this is interesting. So certainly I've seen this list before. You know, if you do any course on machine learning or data science, you'll see something coming up here. And what was that? That term? What is it? Data munging? I seem to remember. It's data wranglings. Data munging is sometimes referred as data wrangling. It's a process of transforming and mapping data from one raw data form into another format with the intent of making it more appropriate and valuable for a variety of downstream purposes such as analytics. I was actually talking to a family member the other day about this very thing, because we were talking about you know, different data formats like JSON and XML, and once we started chatting about it, I was minded of this whole thing, and over the years I've spent a lot of time outside of data science actually doing, you know, transforming data from one format to another. Particularly you get it a lot actually when you do work on in accounting systems, because a lot of them are so old. They have these antiquated file formats that they sometimes either pull from or save to. And I ended up, in the course of this conversation, I was talking to them about, what was it, EDI, is it electronic data interchange? The sort of early days. I was doing it, I was involved with it like this before I was lecturing, so around 97. And I remember having to like read up about the IBM system that was being used at the time, and a lot of firms were just dipping their toe in using EDI systems that worked over the internet, and everybody was a little bit apprehensive about that. Oh, I got a Yowly Kitty giving me additional advice about data munging. I'm sure it's very interesting. Yeah. Don't worry, they're not hungry. It's just I've got my door shut and they, I think it's normally time for an afternoon interaction, and they're probably wondering where I am. So I might wrap this up in a moment, just for my kitty's benefit. Yeah, so hopefully this has just been an interesting ramble, and just really just showing you what I'm seeing as a a new user to this interface. Not, I mean, obviously I've done some work with pre-GPT chatbots, as I think I've mentioned in the past, but they've been very simple stuff. Just really again kicking the tires of things to find out if they would be usable as a way of like channeling customers down a certain route, basically in terms of contacts. But yeah, this is, I always love this step, actually. This is I have this bizarre love of taking data formats and converting them. In a job I worked through in the 2010s, well into the 2020s, I would often get consulted on like how to move stuff from one format to another, because people were aware of my experience of working with electronic data interchange, and I knew some individuals who were involved with e-billing and stuff like that, and of course they had that horrible job of trying to get e-billing formats to basically e-billing systems to talk to one another, but basically taking something that had been spat out of one system and feeding it into another. And so they'd come across all these really antiquated formats, and they think, oh yeah, I know someone who's been around for a while and probably knows some of this weird stuff, and they'd be asking me about the different related to things like ASCII codes and I'm trying to think what you call them now, but where you have the different character sets, things like that, and all the weird and wonderful stuff. You see a lot of very strange stuff as well in document preparation as well, in terms of data. You have a lot of these templates now which people download for use in Word, and they have all these strange, what's it called, M-dash and whatever, and like showing people how to do find and replace, and the order they should do it in to basically remove everything in the right order, because a lot of those delimiters, whatever you call them, that are often used in document templates can be used really effectively with find and replace and paragraph settings. Now I've gone off on a complete tangent. Anyway, so I'm going to wrap it up now and go and interact with my Yowly Kitty. Thanks very much for watching. Bye for now, and I will catch you in the next episode. And let me know if this is something you'd like to have a regular feature, where maybe once every week or so I just dive into Bing and get it to teach me about something.